My name is Ron Gavalik, Media Coordinator for the Green Party at Allegheny County. I recently had the privilege to interview Pat Thetic, co-founder and drummer for the punk band Anti-Flag out of Pittsburgh. For several decades, punk music has promoted green-friendly positions on anarchist views of social justice, a healthy ecology, peace, and working-class dignity. Anti-Flag rose from the ashes of the Rust Belt of Pittsburgh after most of the steel mills had closed due to neoliberal globalization in the 1980s. Anti-Flag's music spoke to the frustrations of the young, who knew we'd have to rebuild the world. As multinational corporations and their political actors in the duopoly continue to push for austerity measures that punch down upon today's working class, Anti-Flag's music is even more relevant today. I hope you find our discussion interesting and empowering. Okay, I'm with Pat Thetic of Anti-Flag. That band formed in 1988 out of Pittsburgh, PA. They're a punk band that are extremely well known. I'm very fortunate today to be conducting this interview with Pat. How are you today, Pat?
I'm great. I'm sitting in my car because that's my office these days. My son takes naps around this time, so it's hard to be in the house and to chat with people and not wake him up. So I find it's best to go out, and luckily I still have some internet, so this is the best place for me to conduct business these days in COVID times.
That's funny. Okay. So because of the pandemic, you're forced to do your business from the car. Okay.
Yeah, well, this is my high-tech office. This is where I do my work. Yeah, it's nice because I get a change of scenery. Sometimes I'm at my house out in the street. I can still catch the internet there. Sometimes I'm at the office. Today I'm outside of the office. My wife is in healthcare, so the other guys in the band and at the office, they don't want me to be around because they're concerned that I will be the thing that spreads COVID into everybody else's environment. So they want to keep me out of the office and out of the practice room.
No, of course. I mean, the quarantine is a big deal. We have to follow it. I've been following it as well.
Yeah.
All of our political meetings for the Green Party have been conducted through Zoom over the past month or so. I completely understand.
Yeah. So that's my world. But it could be worse. My car is pretty comfortable, so I'm okay in here. It's all right.
Excellent. So I got a few questions for you, if that's okay.
Okay. Yeah. Great. Give me it.
So first, I would just like to learn a little bit about Anti-Flag. It's the band itself. So what made you and Justin want to start the band back in, I guess it was 88, right?
Yeah, so Justin and I were friends. We played under 10 soccer together. So we'd been together. We went to different schools and things like that, but we had always been connected since we were really young. And as we got older, we developed an interest in music. And Justin's family they're Irish immigrants, and they come from a very political background. As a lot of people know, with Ireland and Northern Ireland in the UK, there's a lot of political strife there. And so everybody that I've met that comes out of Ireland is politicized to some degree. And his parents were no different. So he was exposed to a lot of politics when he was growing up. My family, we were exposed to politics on a different. My father was pretty right wing, so I was exposed to a different world of politics. But when you grow up in Pittsburgh and you're interested in music and activism, there is a nexus that happens in Pittsburgh. That there is a large left-wing music activism community, and when we were growing up, we found that, and it made sense to us. And the music that we created was an important part of the music that we created, the activism part of it, and it's still part of the thing that makes us continue to play music. Music for me is interesting as a vehicle to inspire and to change people's minds. So that's a lot of people are like, music isn't able to really do anything, but music actually inspires people to take a lot of action and makes you feel certain things. And if you can, at its best, it can actually be the soundtrack to changing the world. That's a little hippy dippy bullshit, but that for me, that when music is at its best, it is the soundtrack to change.
Well, that's interesting that you bring up the politics and the music together. I mean, I see punk as a genre as being maybe the most political genre of music that exists, and maybe you can tell me I'm wrong about that through history, but that's just how I see it. Is that why you guys chose punk as a genre, because it's so political, or was it just more of a natural fit of artistic tendencies?
We were angry kids. We couldn't play very well, so it sort of made sense to us. I think that punk rock is, for people who came out of the world that we lived in. Obviously, we're white kids. We grew up in relatively white communities, so that is the direction we went. Hip hop is very political, and there's political jazz. There's a lot of different political music out there. But punk rock is the one that, because we were angry young white kids, that we found and made the most sense to us at the time.
Okay. So yeah, I mean, angry white kids make sense, but angry white kids from working class Rust Belt neighborhoods is also, I mean, I don't know a lot of the history of punk, but when you think of like, Great Britain and Liverpool and all these like old industrial revolution type regions, I think of punk.
Well, yeah, and actually the interesting thing about us growing up is that we found a community that was politically active, and if you were not politically active in a Pittsburgh music, in a band from Pittsburgh, you were the outsider. And that's very different from places like LA or New York, where people are like, oh, we sing about other things and that's not our focus. And we're like, that, you mean you're in a punk band and you're not? But we realized over time that Pittsburgh is very unique with the labor history that Pittsburgh has, with the steel strikes, with the exploitation of workers, the immigrants that have come in to Pittsburgh. So this area, southwestern Pennsylvania, is very strong for activism and labor rights. It's interesting that it socially sometimes leans a little bit right wing, but if you talk about economic justice, then it's definitely much more left wing. So those are the things that are very interesting to me, because we thought that every punk band in the world was going to be leftist activists, but different cities have different flavors, and luckily we came from Pittsburgh, which was a flavor of culture that made the most sense to us.
That kind of reminds me of something that I read a few years ago about the artists of our societies being the truth tellers. Through history, it's always the artists who point out the emperor is like buck naked, right? As an author myself and a poet, I've made a kind of a career out of the pursuit of personal truth. Where I see as Anti-Flag, you guys very much pursue societal truth, right? Outward truth.
That's been our goal, is to find the things that people don't quite understand, or people that aren't completely aware of in the society, and elevate those ideas. Whether it's the war in Iraq being, a fallacy and an attempt at oil grab, all those ideas that at the time people were not as aware. Now, as we look back, everybody's like, oh yeah, that was George Bush is a war criminal. He made all these false statements to achieve this war that he wanted, and it's been a windfall for the stealing of natural resources. So at the time, those things weren't part of the dialogue. They were in the underground. And Anti-Flag's job at it, when we're at our best, is we find these ideas and elevate them into the society at large, and hopefully have a conversation about them. Where we run into problems, and this is the world that we live in now, is that my grandmother knows Donald Trump is a putz and a liar. So that's not interesting to elevate that idea. So we always have to find the edges of the ideas to elevate, to be able to change the society, because things that everybody knows are, artistically are just not interesting. You always have to find the edges. And in the absurdity of 2020, or the last 3.5 years, finding those edges is very difficult, because the absurdity is so great.
All right, let me put you on the spot. So your new album, which is 2020 Vision, correct? Do
Correct.
you feel like that has found those fringes?
It has found those fringes. It's on the edges of immigration issues. It's on the edges of the cultural issues. Those are that but it is definitely challenging, because the story that, and I'm sure you hear this as well, is when Bush was elected the first time, or when Trump was elected, everybody's like, well, punk rock and activism are going to blow up because and all the music's going to get great because this guy's such a moron and you can talk about it. But it's really harder than you would think to find things that are interesting to say about the emperor who has no clothes. Everybody knows he has no clothes on, and just pointing out that he has no clothes is not interesting artistically.
Right, music, art as a whole evolves over time. At one point, maybe 100 years ago, pointing out no clothes was good enough. Now we really do have to meet demands of today as artists and writers and musicians and sculptors and painters. Okay. So I'm sure you're familiar with the term Green New Deal, right? So
yes.
So we here at the Green Party of Allegheny County, we're working on a localized version of that in order to address, to directly take on the energy needs of our people. And I was just wondering, as someone who's an artist, as a musician who's been widely successful and has been able to communicate with people around the world, what is your take on clean energy, and what do you feel like people are kind of getting the feel for out in the world?
Well, as we travel around the world, the big thing that I realize is that clean energy, that the U.S. is behind, that all over the whole world is doing clean energy so much better than the U.S. And it's a failure of the U.S. on many levels, because even if you're a complete capitalist, you have to realize that the rest of the world is going into a direction and the U.S. isn't going. So the U.S. is completely left out of that market. But the thing for me about clean energy and all of the issues with environmental is it also has to have a social justice and an economic justice thing, where it doesn't help for rich white people to have Teslas and nobody else to be able to afford them, because that doesn't help anybody. I understand that there is a class of people who need to be the trendsetters and to be able to move the technology along, but at some point we all have to have access to it, and it doesn't. And so that's one very specific example of automobile, but within the whole community, we all have to be able to have access to these devices that can save energy or not use any energy. And at this point, those are most expensive, and they're hard for a lot of the population to have access to. And that's one of the things that in other countries, again, we have the luxury of traveling around and seeing other places, that other cultures are much more effective at egalitarianizing that technology and allowing all people to have access to it.
Okay, so the Green Party here locally in Allegheny County in the greater Pittsburgh region, we're working on a localized Green New Deal like I just mentioned, but we're trying to focus it more on geothermal for heating for homes, and that's actually does a lot of cooling for homes as well. And it would really kind of cut out a lot of that natural gas for certain communities. But we're trying to figure out a way to best introduce that for working class people, where communities could actually adopt it at the municipal level and then pay for that through a modest tax that would replace your gas bill. But we're not ready to release anything about that yet, and we don't want to release anything until we know it's going to be cost effective for working people. We don't want anything to be like, oh, raise taxes and just, you know, add on to a loss of individual power.
Yeah, and again, it's interesting that you say that, because you and I were talking a little bit earlier before we started recording about our heritage and where we come from in the world. And when I look at places like Central Europe, there is a lot of shared use of resources, where communities will have a whole gas line or something like that, or a whole, what the other thing is, what is it, like steam pipes that are centrally located and go into all of the buildings, rather than each house having their own heating and cooling mechanisms. But if we could elaborate on that and expand on that, the idea of if you could do a geothermal neighborhood where the geothermal is underneath the whole neighborhood and is able to connect into the houses, that would definitely have a cost savings and have people be able to have access to it. And then we all know with geothermal, you only have to heat it a little bit more or cool it a little bit more to make it comfortable, so it saves a significant amount of energy. The problem with geothermal, and I think this is probably what you're dealing with, is if each house has to dig up their backyard to put enough geothermal in to cover that individual house, that's very expensive. But if you could connect into a geothermal plane that was covered the whole community, that would be, in my mind, would be a much better use of economic resources and save a lot of money and gas resources as well, I would think.
I don't want to keep hammering home the environmental issues, but since I have you here for this interview, I would like to bring this up because, as you mentioned, we're both children of mill workers, of steel workers, my grandfather was a boilermaker as well. My father was a railroader. So we all have this blue collar kind of background to us. And as you probably know, Pennsylvania, and especially southwestern to central Pennsylvania, is the epicenter of fracking, right? Which is leading to a lot of problems locally with water supplies. Bell Vernon is experiencing really heinous poisoned water supplies. And I don't know how much you know about fracking, but anything that you guys could do as a band to raise consciousness of that, I don't know if you have any plans for that or if you're reading up on it.
Well, the interesting thing about fracking for me is that we thought that 10 years ago or so, when it came into the Pittsburgh region, that it was a Pittsburgh thing, and oh, why is this? But as we've traveled around, and we see that fracking is an issue all over the world. As oil prices go up, those types of technologies that are much less effective, but as the prices go up, they become more economically viable. But they also have significant environmental impacts and just blow up people's wells and all kinds of horrible things. So yeah, it's something that originally I thought was a local issue, but now I've learned that it's actually a international issue.
And here's another thing that's interesting too, being that you brought up Ireland earlier because of your lead singer. Ireland had banned fracking, right? But I just recently learned this. I don't know how long this has been going on, but Pennsylvania is actually exporting fracked natural gas to Ireland. So yeah, they banned it, right? But they're just importing it now. So it's the same destruction. It's just unfortunate. It's politics.
Well, and to go to the silver lining of COVID, where all of us are trapped in our houses, we're using much less resources now. Obviously, we're using natural gas. So we have to heat our houses, and we're there. But we are using a lot less resources. So the cost of all these things have come down, which made fracking less of a viable resource extraction method. So it has slowed down all of those things which there is some, that's a silver lining. Obviously people are out of work and that's not good, but there are significantly less, there's less need for that fracked resource in 2020 in the last 3 months.
Yeah, true. So again, to hammer home the ecological collapse that's upon us, do you see your music as kind of empowering people on issues of, say, ecological collapse and issues of justice? Is that kind of like when you guys sit down and actually create the music, is that what's in the mind here, or can you give me a little bit of an idea of
what is in our mind is something that we're passionate about, and it might be ecological justice, it might be social justice, it might be economic justice, it might just be this fucked up situation that we've seen in the news, or police shootings or something like that. So those things, as creative people, and this, that there's no way that anybody could tell you, I want you to write about this and do it effectively, because you can't. You can only write what you are passionate about. You can only create something that you're passionate about. And people understand schlock when they see it. And if you try to produce something because you think it's going to make you money, or you think it's going to do something, it never quite works out. The things that really connect with people are the passion, the things that you're passionate about. So when we sit down and create music, we're passionate about it. It's things that are interesting to us, things that we care about. And then I don't subscribe to the idea that it is our responsibility to do these things. The right wing's always like, well, you have a responsibility as an athlete or as a whatever, musician and artist. No, you don't have a responsibility to do anything. You create what you create, and if they don't like it, fuck them. But for us, it's interesting, and it is important to us to talk about these issues because we are very passionate about the issues. And so that's why we create this music, not because we think that it's necessarily going to change. If it changes things, that's awesome. We love it because we're very personally invested in changing things, but it's not our responsibility to do those things. So when we create music, we're like, this is very important to us. This is something we're passionate about. We have a desire and a need to get it out of our bodies and out of our minds and talk about it. But it's not our responsibility to do that. And if it connects with other people, that's awesome.
But I'm sure that when you put out that passion, right, and it's met with applause from an audience, whether it's record sales or whether it's people turning out to a concert, I'm sure that's just so thrilling, because it's like, hey, look, people identify with what we identify with.
Yeah, well, that is true. That to be in a room where people are passionate about things that you care about as well is amazingly empowering. And to be in a room where people are like, the rest of the world sucks, but this space, I feel safe. I feel like these people care about the same issues that I care about. That's an amazing experience. And to create that and be a part of that is awesome. So yes, absolutely. It is, we definitely get a lot out of it. But we're not here to change your mind. If you want to be a part of it, we want you to be there. But if you don't believe or don't understand or it doesn't connect with you, that's perfectly fine. I'm fine with that. But if it does connect with you, come along, because the more of us we have, the more boots we have on the streets, the more change we can create.
Yeah. Well, I mean, I think a lot of people are confused between persuasion, the act of persuasion, which is more of a political activity, and then raising consciousness, which is more of a communications activity, right? So I look at music as more of that communications, raising consciousness. So you're identifying people who already have this living within them, and then they're identifying with it through the music, and they're just kind of letting it come out of them. They're kind of becoming radicalized by the music in some ways.
Yeah. It's funny you say that, because we've been talking about that a lot lately. because a lot of people right now are because of the COVID and because of the fear that's being spread in the world, a lot of people are becoming radicalized for the right in the right wing. And we have friends who are becoming conspiracy theorists who hadn't been that way in the past. So yeah, radicalization is happening all the time. It can be a good thing, it can be a bad thing. We always talk about radicalization of non-white people is scary, but there's a lot of white people right now who are being radicalized, and that is very scary as well.
Yeah, I mean, we're all one people, one earth. I think I read that on a banner somewhere back in the 80s.
That is true.
So, I don't want to pick your brain too hard on party political things, but being that you guys do exist kind of outside of what we would consider the mainstream, do you have any thoughts on the best way to kind of break up the Democratic-Republican duopoly that's kind of upon us and seized our government and seized our society?
I have a little bit of a pessimistic view of that, and the reason why I have a pessimistic view is not because because there's very intelligent people in both Republican and Democratic Party, and their goal in life is to maintain power. It's not about policy, it's to maintain power. And the way they maintain power is to amass as many people behind their system as possible. If there were 2 million people in the US who said they wanted to have purple trees, either the Republicans or the Democrats would make that part of their platform. It would be very difficult to have a purple tree party because one or the other would absorb that ideology. And so that is their way of maintaining their power. They're never going to allow a purple tree party to be there because they will ultimately absorb it so they can continue the duality of politics. It is messed up, and I don't know how to solve that because there's nothing to keep them. We've learned from the Trump administration that smaller government is not a right-wing, it's not the pillar of the right-wing platform anymore, because Trump came in and is giving money away to everybody, which you could argue is good or bad. But the right wing used to be about smaller government, don't give money to anybody. And Trump, who is the head of the right wing party right now, has become the socialist party in the last, which is crazy to me.
As some people say, socialism for the rich, rugged individualism for the poor.
Exactly. But if you would have said 10 years ago that the Republican Party would be the one promoting giving away millions of dollars, mostly to rich people, but then a little bit to the rest of us, we would have thought that was crazy. But so there's an example of the two parties absorbing whatever needs to happen at that time that the population wants to keep and maintain their power, even though it does not resemble the platform of the party from 5 years ago.
Well, that's one thing the Green Party. I'm sorry to interrupt you. That's one thing the Green Party kind of represents, right? We are here as a minor party specifically to build solidarity in order to pressure the duopoly, right? Of course, we're an electoral party. We want to win offices, and we actually have recently elected somebody in Edgewood as borough council. Okay.
Yeah.
But we as a minor party, this kind of applies to all third parties, including the Libertarian Party on the right wing, where you're there to create solidarity and apply pressure in order to have your issues addressed. And that's something I'm seeing a problem with, because people are, not everybody, we're getting a lot of support right now, actually, but a lot of these people in the world that I encounter, they're kind of just gravitating to authority, whether it's in the Democratic Party or the Republican Party, and instead of kind of thinking for themselves. And that's one thing I wanted to bring up to you, because as a punk musician, as you have this passion that pours out of you, as you said before, and then you're identifying other audiences, do you see a certain independence of thought within your audiences?
Yes, we we play to the fuck ups and weirdos for sure. And so those are the people who are on the fringe, who don't fit into that world, and they're looking for, much like we are, we're the fuck ups and weirdos as well. We're looking for that community of the outcast. And so yeah, there's independent thought. Everything from the outside looks homogenous. Everything from the inside looks independent. So it depends on where you're standing, whether you truly have independent thought or not. But yeah, I think that the music and the people who gravitate towards what we do are the outsiders and the outcasts. And I know that outsiders and outcasts tend to see the world obviously slightly different, and can find solutions in places that people from the inside can't find. And so your statement about the Green Party is absolutely true. We absolutely need these organizations to push the agenda, because like I said originally, the Republicans and the Democrats, that duality of power, their only goal is to maintain power. If the two choices are between Coke and Pepsi, they're very happy, because they can put as many people in those two boxes as possible. But when you have other organizations that make people think broader, that is in everybody's best interest. The more ideas we have at the party, the better solution we'll come up with. When we only have two ideas at the party, that's a really boring and dull party with no real solutions.
Right. So I know I've been binging anti-flag videos right on YouTube the past couple days. And one kind of common thing that I pick up from you guys is a certain level of anti-militarism, right? A lot of pushback against that kind of authoritarian grip on culture. And I was just wondering if you could share any thoughts about the music and how that kind of plays into that kind of like, that kind of independence away from militarism.
Well, yeah, the military is the antithesis of punk rock and the antithesis of freedom of thought and action. So as young people, we grew up in the drumbeat to the first Gulf War. And we were part of that experience. And there was the concern that was going to lead to drafts and things like that. So that militarism of the culture, we saw that as a horrible thing, and we realized that militarism never solves any problem. It just wastes resources and kills people. And so from that, we have a whole perspective on the world about how the military is used by the rich and the corporations and the powerful to protect their power and to exploit the workers and the people who don't have the resources to choose other ways of living. But to go even one step further, we found that the name anti-flag was a statement against the fact that any politician, you'll see this in any news or any press briefing by political figures, the worse the thing that they want you to do, the more flags there are behind them. So if they want you to go fight a war, they want you to stay at home, they want you to do whatever they want you to do, they wrap themselves figuratively, in some ways, literally, in the flag. And so that was our statement as the name anti-flag, to say, just because you can stand next to a flag doesn't mean you convey power that I have to adhere to when you're asking me to do immoral and unjust things.
I also see this growing militarism, especially in our communities, with policing agencies, dressed like they're soldiers. I just see this all as a form of late-stage capitalism, as the wealth disparity grows, as people become more unrestful. It's just you can't base your whole economy on the production of weapons to kill people in other places of the world who have less resources than you do, and not have that come back to your own home culture with school shootings, with violence every day. The number of mass shootings that are happening in the U.S., even with COVID going on, is amazing. It's incredible that there are still people being killed with guns every day in the U.S.
while we have these stay-at-home orders. I was just on a call with Everytown, yesterday, which is a anti-gun organization. Or I guess that's probably they probably wouldn't be happy me saying that, but a organization that is focused on reducing gun deaths.
Would it be fair? Would it be fair to call them like an anti-violence organization?
Yeah, anti-violence. Yeah, I don't know their press briefing. I should have gotten it in my head before I talked about them. But yes, they are an organization that is trying to advocate both politically, grassroots, on the ground, against gun violence. And they have these amazing statistics that gun violence has actually not gone down since COVID, which you would assume. And the fact that that guns are still killing people every day in the U.S., even if you didn't have any deaths from COVID or heart attacks, you'd still have all these gun deaths in the U.S., which is a public health issue, and it's a direct result of the militarization of our culture. And just not to go one step further, we live in this. We can't see it because we're so inside it. But when you get a chance to travel and to see it, the U.S. from other places, and you realize that they don't have militaries that are out protecting their resources and economic interests all over the world, you realize, oh, they have universal health care. Oh, they have clean energy for their population. Oh, they have clean water for their population. And we're told over and over again that there's no resources for this because we have to spend all this money on this military and keeping this military going.
Right. Policemen of the world. That's the friendly term.
Yeah.
So I just wanted to get back to your career a little bit. If you had to think of, and this is me putting you on the spot a little bit, if you had to think about a moment in your career that would have been your best political moment, right? Whether it be like a concert tour or an individual venue or maybe an album or one song that you come up with, what would you say is your best political moment in your career with Anti-Black?
I will use a very selfish answer to this question.
Yeah, please do.
There's a song called Anatomy of Your Enemy, which is the only song in the Anti-Flag catalog that is sung by me, and it's very loosely sung. And it's sort of a spoken word song. And it describes how when there is conflict that threatens the state creates an enemy. And it goes through the steps of doing that. And it's not that it's not an amazing piece of art, but it shows that these tactics that are used by the state, meaning governments, when they are threatened, are common across the board. It doesn't matter whether it's the U.S. or whether it's China, whether it's Russia. The details are different, but every time that this happens, there are these, they use this playbook. And what that does then is makes you realize, oh, I don't need to be as afraid of this because this is just a tactic that's being used against me to convince me to do their bidding. And I don't have to buy in. And so that is it's a very obscure song that we did years and years ago. But that is a very political, one of the strongest political statements that I feel that we've created. One of the most fun political activities that we did was being part of a show, demonstration, protest at the RNC in Minneapolis with Rage Against the Machine, and having the police come in and shut it down, and having the kids after the show in the back alley singing the national anthem while the horses are putting the gas masks on the horses and getting ready to charge the crowd. And that for me made me realize that these values that we call American values are very fragile, and when the powerful feel threatened, they will use any tactics they can to squash dissent. But if dissent is big enough, we have the power. And it's all about having boots on the streets in a town, in an area, to be counted. You don't have to break a window, but you have to be counted. You have to be physically there, and that's where the power lies. And if you can amass enough people, you can change things through that act of being in the streets and being counted.
They have the money, we have the people.
That is true. That is our only power. Our only power is having is enough people in the streets to be taken seriously.
Before we wrap up, I'd just like to talk to you a little bit about 2020 vision, if that's okay.
Sure.
Yeah, can you tell me a little bit about like what kind of inspired that album, and just give me a little bit about the background of it?
Well, it's the record came out in earlier this year, and yeah, it's just a it deals with the Trump presidency. It deals with the exhaustion of dealing with scandal and ridiculousness, the absurdity of being a politically active person in 2018 or 16 to 2020. It's an expression of our anger and our frustration, and tries to put that into a thing that people can connect with and say, oh yeah, that makes sense to me. I understand that. I understand what they're talking about because I'm feeling it as well. And yeah, that's what all the records are about. It's about expressing our truth, and if we do it accurately, other people will be able to connect with it.
And I know the pandemic has kind of put a crimp on the tour schedule, right? So do you guys feel like you'll be able to pick that back up, or all your dates, are they kind of like just in limbo at this point and they'll just kind of like be pushed out, or do you think you'll have to reschedule everything?
What it looks like is, on a technical business end of touring, what it looks like they're doing is they're just taking the whole package of 2020 and flipping it to 2021. It seems like they're not going to have very much in the way of live music in 2020. Everybody is sort of pushing their whole calendar and just pretending 2020 didn't happen and putting it to 2021.
So if I had to ask you to leave us with any final thoughts about political activism and how that relates to music, what do you think you could tell us? Like, do you have any advice for anybody out there who's a fan of Anti-Flag or just punk rock in general, and how they can use that fandom and use that interest to advance certain political ideals?
No, but I will tell you this. Start a band, write a blog, write poetry, whatever your passion is, do it, and do it in the way that you can connect with other people, because those connections, again, are what brings people together. And when you bring those people together, whether it's around environmental issues, whether it's around social justice issues, whether it's around economic issues, when you bring people together, you have power. When we sit at home and we talk to our racist uncle, we don't have any power, because it's just the two of us and he's a racist and you're like, why are you such a piece of shit? When you come together and you have enough people together, you get critical mass, and then things start to change. So we were interested in music, and that was the vehicle that we used for social change. But whatever thing you're passionate about, use that for social change. And you don't, obviously, whatever I have to say is not interesting. If you connect with it, great. If you don't connect with it, create your own messages and your own ideas and get those out there, and hopefully somebody will connect with those.
Okay, thank you, Pat. I really appreciate you taking the time to interview today. Anybody who's watching this video, I please encourage you to comment, like, and share the video. Be sure to check out Anti-Flag and their new album, 2020 Vision. And I will talk to you soon. Thank you very much.